A quiet voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Sir, we need this seat for another passenger." The entire first-class cabin fell silent. All eyes turned toward the black man in a charcoal-grey suit, Ethan Marshall, 45 years old, CEO of Sentinel Dynamics, a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity corporation. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan looked up. The light from the aircraft window reflected across his face, the face of a man who had learned to remain silent under countless doubtful gazes. But this time, his eyes didn't look away. Before the cabin became a battlefield of dignity, that morning had been as peaceful as any other. At 5 o'clock in the morning, Atlanta was still half asleep. In a penthouse on the 40th floor, Ethan began his day with his usual workout routine. Each push, each breath was a reminder that discipline was the only thing he could truly control in a world that rarely played fair. He hadn't been born in luxury or into a life paved with privilege. He grew up on the east side of Detroit, where the sounds of car horns, street vendors, and sometimes gunfire were the background music of childhood. His mother, Denise Marshall, worked 3 jobs: night janitor, daytime housekeeper, and seamstress in the evenings. On winter nights, she sat sewing his clothes in a cold room and whispered, "You can't choose where you start, Ethan, but you can choose where you finish." Those words followed him all his life. When Ethan walked into Hartsfield-Jackson Airport that morning, he had no idea the day would become a turning point. He had just finished his final call with the board of directors. The deal with NextCore Global in San Francisco could raise Sentinel Dynamics' valuation to $30 billion. Everything was perfectly planned. As he passed through the priority check-in area, he smiled politely at the staff. The smile he received back was hesitant, uncertain, as the employee's eyes moved from the first-class ticket in his hand to his face, as if silently double-checking. In that moment, he understood. He was used to that look, the one that didn't need words, only a silent question. "Are you sure you belong here?" Ethan replied, with the polite smile he had mastered over 20 years, a shield against those respectful doubts. He knew that anger never changed such looks, but success and dignity could make them bow their heads. As he boarded the first-class cabin of North Star Airways, Ethan felt the familiar scent of power, Italian leather, expensive perfume, the low murmur of people too accustomed to privilege. His seat 2A by the window awaited him. He placed his sleek black briefcase, holding plans worth billions, into the overhead compartment. Every detail of his morning had been calculated with precision, like an algorithm, until the flight attendant appeared. "Good morning, Mr. Marshall." The young woman, Lena Brooks, 32, smiled warmly. "Would you like lemon water or coffee?" "Thank you. Lemon water is fine." She paused when she heard his name, her face lighting up. "You're the founder of the STEM scholarship for black students, right? I saw your video once. It was so inspiring." Ethan nodded gently. Those kids deserve to see themselves in the future without fear of being excluded. For that brief moment, he felt a rare peace. The first-class cabin, usually a fortress of separation, seemed calm today. But peace he didn't know was only the silence before a storm. Outside the window, the morning sun spread golden light across the silver wing. Ethan opened his tablet, reviewing his presentation. Every chart aligned, every number perfect. He stopped at the final slide, the quote his mother once wrote, now embedded as a personal reminder. "No matter how high you fly, never forget the ground you came from." The announcement came through the speaker's boarding complete. Ethan leaned back and took a deep breath. One important day, one ordinary flight that was all he needed. Then the cabin door opened again. A white man in a pale suit, carrying a thick leather case, entered with visible irritation. "This is ridiculous. I booked this seat yesterday." The sharp voice pulled Ethan from his thoughts. The man stood in the aisle. Gregory Walton, 52, vice president of a major bank. His eyes moved quickly toward seat 2, a Ethan's seat, and stopped, as if seeing something out of place. "I'm sorry, but this seat is mine," Gregory said, his tone stiff, not quite angry, more like an administrative order. Lena stepped forward, ready to explain, but another voice interrupted Colin Rogers, the head attendant, his expression slightly strained. "So there seems to be a mix-up with the seating. Mr. Walton is a platinum member of our airline." Ethan looked up, his gaze calm but unyielding. "I have a boarding pass for seat 2A, and I checked in 2 hours ago." Colin forced a polite smile. "Yes, but the system shows 2 passengers under the same seat number. We'll sort this out quickly." The air in the cabin thickened. Other passengers looked up. Phones began to tilt discreetly toward the scene. A few exchanged glances, the kind Ethan knew all too well, curious, judgmental, quietly entertained. In his mind, his mother's voice echoed, "Stay calm. The further you go, the more they'll want to see you lose control." He pressed his lips together and nodded slightly. "I'll wait for a reasonable explanation." Lena stood between them, her face tense, while Colin turned away, murmuring into his radio. Outside, sunlight flared through the windows. Inside, the air conditioning couldn't cool the rising heat, the kind that comes not from temperature, but from injustice slowly simmering in seat 2A. Ethan's fingers brushed the small steel bracelet on his wrist, the gift from his mother, when he graduated from MIT. Under the bright light, the bracelet glinted like a spark. He didn't know that spark would soon ignite a storm called justice. At the back of the cabin, a passenger whispered to his friend. Someone like him probably sat in the wrong place. No one replied, but in Ethan's eyes, a quiet fire had already begun to burn, steady, fierce, unstoppable. The plane hadn't taken off yet, but the battle for dignity had already begun. Leather shoes tapped softly against the carpet as Colin Rogers, chief attendant of North Star Airways, returned to the first-class cabin, wearing a polite, almost mechanical smile. "Mr. Marshall," he began, his tone carrying a trace of unease, but maintaining the authority of someone accustomed to command. "There seems to be a small system error. Mr. Walton is one of our Platinum Elite passengers. The airline shows he has priority for seat 2A. The air froze. Ethan looked up, his dark eyes deep and still like a lake before a storm. He folded his tablet, placed it gently on the tray, and spoke in a low voice, calm but sharp as steel. "I don't care about anyone's membership status. I have a boarding pass, a ticket, a confirmation, and I'm sitting in the seat I paid for." Gregory Walton, the silver-haired man standing beside Colin, gave a thin smile, the kind worn by someone used to having doors open for him. "You see, this is my seat. I've been flying first class for over 20 years. This must be a system glitch." Ethan didn't look up. "Perhaps. But a system error doesn't give you the right to take what I've paid for." A few passengers leaned slightly in their seats, phones discreetly lifted to record. Within those gazes, curiosity mingled with quiet judgment. Lena, the attendant, who had earlier greeted Ethan with warmth, now stood still, her hands clasped before her, torn between duty and conscience. Colin tried to keep his tone even. "Mr. Marshall, we can arrange another seat for you in first class, or if none are available, we'll refund the difference and offer bonus miles as an apology." Ethan glanced around. Every first-class seat was taken. He smiled faintly, a cold smile. That won't be necessary. I'll stay in the seat I purchased unless someone can prove I don't deserve it. His voice was quiet, but it landed with the weight of iron. Gregory began to lose patience. "Come on," he said louder this time. "Let's not make this complicated. I have an important meeting in San Francisco, and I don't intend to argue over something this small." Ethan replied without looking at him. "How interesting. I also have an important meeting in San Francisco. The difference is mine involves a $3 billion deal." The cabin went dead silent. Colin frowned slightly. "Sir, I'm asking for your cooperation. We'd prefer not to call airport security." Lena lifted her head and gave the slightest shake, a small, subtle gesture that Ethan caught. He tightened his grip on the armrest, his tone deep and steady. "I'm not causing trouble. I'm simply holding on to what's mine. If you want to handle this properly, I'm ready to talk. But if you plan to give my seat away, I'd like to see that policy in writing." A flush crept up Colin's neck. "We have the right to adjust seating for operational reasons." Operational Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Operational or prejudicial?" The words sliced through the cabin, leaving silence in their wake. Then came the heavy sound of boots on the floor. Captain Richard Hayes, 55 years old, stepped out from the cockpit. His face was as calm as a clock, but his voice was flat and cold. "Good morning. I hear there's a problem here," Colin quickly explained. The captain glanced at Gregory, then turned to Ethan. "Mr. Marshall, under North Star policy, we have the right to reassign seats when necessary. Mr. Walton is a Platinum Elite passenger, and Ethan cut him off, his tone soft but sharp as a blade. I'm also an Elite member. I booked this seat 3 weeks ago and confirmed it twice. You say it's necessary. Necessary for what reason? Because my skin color doesn't fit the seat I'm in." The air cracked open. Lena turned away, her hands tightening. A woman in row 3 whispered, "Oh God, Captain." Hayes paused for several seconds, then said, "Sir, I'm not here to debate. If you refuse to comply, I'll have to ask you to leave the flight. We can't take off while a passenger refuses crew instructions." Ethan let out a soft laugh, thin and bitter as a knife's edge. "Comply or submit?" Gregory folded his arms, leaning back with a look of smug satisfaction. "I told you," he muttered to someone nearby. "People like this always make things dramatic." Ethan stood. His movements were deliberate, controlled. Some thought he was about to explode, but instead he calmly took out his phone and opened the recording app. "I'm recording this conversation," he said clearly, "to make sure no one distorts the truth." Captain Hayes's lips tightened. "Recording is not permitted on the aircraft." "We haven't taken off yet," Ethan replied. "Security will be here shortly if you continue to be uncooperative." Ethan exhaled a long, heavy breath. The anger in his eyes didn't flare. It flowed quietly, dangerously, like lava beneath the surface. "All right," he said finally, his voice cold as steel. "If you insist, do it. But don't forget, many eyes are watching." Across the cabin came the distinct sound of phone cameras clicking. Several passengers were filming. The captain said nothing more, only nodded at Colin. 2 airport security officers entered, both white men, broad-shouldered faces, blank-trained to obey orders without thought. So one said, "We've been informed that you're refusing to comply with crew instructions. Please gather your belongings and step off the plane." Ethan didn't move. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm sitting in the seat I paid for. We're not here to argue, sir." "Please come with us." Lena stepped forward, her voice trembling. "He has the correct ticket. I checked it myself." Captain Hayes spun around sharply, his voice like ice. Williams, back to your station." She froze, then stepped back. Ethan looked around. Faces he didn't know, curious, uneasy, avoiding his gaze. He remembered his father's words. In this country, you'll have to be twice as good to get half the recognition. He had done more than that. Still, it wasn't enough. "I'll leave," he said softly, almost a whisper, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "But I won't leave in silence." He rose slowly, pulling his suitcase from the overhead bin. The two security men shifted slightly apart, as if wary of him. A man in a suit, unarmed, yet his skin alone made them cautious. Ethan walked down the aisle each step, a cut through the air. Humiliation burned up his throat, hot and sharp. Then from row 12, a woman's voice rang out. "This is wrong, he didn't do anything." The cabin froze. A young blonde woman, Emily Carter, 26, stood up, her eyes blazing. "If he's being removed, I'm getting off too." Moments later, an older man, Harold Benson, 67, rose to his feet. "I've lived long enough to recognize injustice when I see it. I'm leaving too." Ethan turned around. Words failed him. He just looked at them, gratitude shining through the tightness in his throat. As he stepped off the plane, 5 more passengers followed. Inside, Gregory leaned back in his seat, smirking. Finally, some peace. The cabin door closed. That sound click felt like a verdict. At the top of the metal staircase, Ethan stopped. The air outside was sharp and cold, the scent of jet fuel mixing with steel. He took a long breath, then whispered, barely audible, "You've just made the biggest mistake of your lives." And in that moment, the man, stripped of his first-class seat, silently took another one far higher, the seat of the one who would make the entire system kneel. The cabin door closed behind Ethan Marshall, but that sound kept echoing in his head, a dry little click cold as a sentence being handed down. Cold air from the jet bridge hit his face, thick with the smell of fuel and metal. With every step, his leather shoes rang against the steel floor, hollow and heavy. He did not look back. He was afraid that if he turned around, he would see himself, the man who had just been stripped not only of a seat, but of his faith in fairness. At the far end of the corridor, a clear voice called out, "Mr. Marshall, please wait a second." Ethan stopped. A young woman in a navy suit was hurrying toward him, her posture straight, her eyes bright. She held out an ID badge with small letters that read, "Monica Reed Center, for Equal Transit, CET." "I was in economy," Monica said, her voice steady but edged with emotion. "I saw the whole thing. What they did to you is completely unacceptable." Ethan studied her part, exhausted part, wary. "Thank you. But I think this is something my company and our lawyers can handle." Monica shook her head gently. "You do not understand. I am a lawyer who specializes in discrimination cases in transportation. And what they just did to you is a textbook example. If you allow it, I would like to represent you at no charge." Ethan fell silent for a few seconds. He glanced around, people passing by, passengers whispering, a few phones quietly filming him. The sting of humiliation still burned on his skin. But in Monica's eyes, he saw something rare. Belief. "Thank you," he said softly. "But I am not ready to turn this into a lawsuit. Right now, I just need to get to San Francisco." "In that case," Monica replied, "let me at least walk with you to the North Star counter. I believe they still owe you an explanation and a new ticket." By the time they reached the customer service desk, the atmosphere had changed completely. The story had already spread. On a staff member's phone, a passenger's video from the plane was beginning to circulate at alarming speed. A 19-year-old student named Noah Kim, who had been sitting in row 14, had posted a 45-second clip on TikTok with the caption, "BlackCeo removed from first class, so white man could have his seat. North Star Airways, Ethan Marshall racism." In just 20 minutes, the video had reached 300,000 views. An hour later, it had passed 1 million. And as soon as the 3 words, Ethan Marshall CEO, were typed into a search engine, the internet started to catch fire. At the service counter, Karen Willis, the airport's director of customer support, hurried out to meet them. Her face was tight beads of sweat forming despite the air conditioning. "Mr. Marshall, we are terribly sorry about what just happened," she said, quickly, her voice soft as velvet. "The airline would like to offer its deepest apologies. Here is a voucher for complimentary business class travel and the earliest connecting ticket to San Francisco." Ethan looked at the paper in her hand, then straight into her eyes. "You call that an incident? Do you know what actually happened? I was forced out of a seat I legally paid for, not because of a technical error, not because of safety, but because a white passenger was treated as more deserving." Karen swallowed hard. I understand, and I am very sorry. We will conduct an internal review," Monica cut in her tone, icy. "No, you do not understand. This is no longer an internal review matter. This is systemic discrimination. And from this moment on, every word you say will be recorded as evidence." A small crowd began to gather around the counter. People recognized Ethan from the video that was now trending online. "Are you the man from that clip? I just saw it on Twitter. I cannot believe the airline actually did that." Ethan took a slow breath, fighting to keep his composure. He did not want to explode, not because he was afraid, but because he knew that the anger of a black man is too often seen not as protest, but as threat. "I do not need a voucher," he said quietly. "I need an answer. Why did the seat I bought suddenly belong to someone else?" Karen faltered. "I will contact upper management, and do not escalate," Monica said, pushing the paper back across the counter. "Say it plainly. If your company cannot answer that right now, we will let the public ask the question for you." The service director went pale. In the crowd, several people had already started live streaming. Phone lights flickered like tiny bursts of artillery. Meanwhile, about 30 miles away at North Star Airways headquarters in downtown Atlanta, Laura Chen, the marketing director, was staring at a Bloomberg screen. A red headline crawled across the bottom: "North Star Airways faces backlash over alleged racial discrimination incident." The airline stock had dropped 8% in just 2 hours. Laura barked into the phone, "Get CEO Robert Langford on the line now. Tell him to put down his golf clubs and prepare for an emergency meeting. If that video is real, we are sitting on a media bomb." Within minutes, the story jumped to CNBC CNN and exploded across Twitter. The hashtag Ethan Marshall Matters climbed into the top 3 in just 45 minutes. Civil rights organizations like NAACP and Equal Transit Alliance shared it in unison with comments like, "When even a black CEO can be thrown out of the seat he paid for it, says a lot about the kind of equality this country likes to brag about." Back at the airport, the noise kept rising. Ethan looked around, and now the faces were no longer just sympathetic. They were angry. A middle-aged woman said, "If that had happened to me, I think I would have gotten off the plane, too." A young man added, "I cannot believe it is already the year 2025, and we are still seeing this." Monica leaned toward Ethan and spoke softly. "Do you see it? This is not just your story anymore. It has become a symbol." Ethan said nothing. Inside him, anger and responsibility collided violently. He had never wanted to be anyone's hero, but silence now felt like complicity. If they wanted to test my limits, he murmured, they just picked the wrong person. A few hours later, as Ethan sat in the lounge, his phone vibrated non-stop. Emails, calls, messages. It felt like the whole world was trying to reach him. His company's communications advisor sent a text, Ethan. The video is going viral worldwide. You need to make a statement before they twist the narrative. Monica walked over a cup of hot coffee in her hand. You should get ready, she said. Things are moving even faster than I expected. Ethan took the cup, his eyes fixed on the window, where the plane he had been forced to leave was preparing for takeoff. Outside, sunlight bounced off the metal fuselage so bright it hurt to look at. He did not look away until the aircraft disappeared from view. They just took off, Monica said quietly. No, Ethan replied, his voice low and cold. They just went into free fall. They just do not know it yet. He unlocked his phone and sent a single message to Sentinel Dynamics public relations team, draft a press statement. Headline, discrimination is not a delay. It is a design flaw. On the other side of the airport, a group of local reporters had arrived. Microphones, cameras, lights. One of them stepped forward and asked, Mr. Marshall, do you have anything you would like to say about what happened on your flight this morning? Ethan rose to his feet. The lounge fell silent. He was not shouting, not raging. His voice was low, firm, and rang out like metal striking metal. I did not lose a seat. I just proved why justice is still stuck in economy. The cameras flared. In that frame, the man from seat 2A was no longer just a humiliated passenger. He had become a spark, one that had just been lit, ready to burn through an entire system that once thought it could never be touched. Flight NS-307 of North Star Airways finally took off, but instead of soaring through calm clouds, it was heading straight into a media storm, unlike anything the airline had ever faced. At an altitude of more than 10,000 meters, Captain Richard Hayes switched on the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delayed departure. Thank you for your patience. His voice was steady, but everyone in first class knew the real reason behind the delay. Many eyes still turned toward seat 2A, now empty. The man sitting there was Gregory Walton, his face stiff like a mask beginning to crack. Flight attendant Lena Brooks avoided his eyes as she poured him a glass of wine. Her hand trembled slightly as she set it down on the metal tray. Red or white, Sir Champagne. And stop shaking, Gregory snapped. Lena bit her lip, fighting to keep her rising anger buried. In her mind, she could still see Ethan Marshall standing tall under the gaze of the entire cabin. She knew he hadn't been wrong. She had checked his boarding pass herself. Everything was legitimate, but she had been powerless to do anything but stay silent. He just wanted to sit in the seat he paid for, she thought. Why was that so hard? A few rows away, a female passenger whispered to her friend, I've seen it on TikTok. That video is everywhere, the friend replied quietly. I know. My daughter sent me the link while we were still taxiing. Inside the cabin, the air felt strange. No one spoke loudly, but everyone sensed they had just witnessed something that could not be undone. In the cockpit, Captain Hayes leaned back in his seat, eyes fixed on the silver-grey sky ahead. Such a small issue turned into a mess, he muttered. Beside him, First Officer James Lynn, an Asian American, replied softly, Sir, that wasn't a small issue. I saw Mr. Marshall's eyes. He was calm, but he wasn't broken. Hayes glanced at him, his voice cool. I followed procedure, James. No one wanted this to happen. but he refused to cooperate. Cooperate or obey. James asked, echoing Ethan's very words from earlier. The cockpit fell silent again. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly blue, but inside the air was thick with what was left unsaid: fear, prejudice, and denial. On the ground at Atlanta Airport, the digital storm had already begun to sweep across the world. Noah Kim's TikTok clip had surpassed 2 million views in just 2 hours. The version on Twitter had been shared over 400,000 times, with the hashtag Ethan Marshall Matters rising to the #1 spot. Comments overflowed with outrage. If even a black CEO can be treated this way who's safe, this isn't about a few bad apples, it's a disease in the system. North Star didn't just lose one first-class seat, they just lost the nation's trust. Other travelers began sharing similar stories of their own experiences, with the airline being scrutinized, longer reassigned without notice, and getting the kind of looks only people of color understood. Ethan's story had become the ignition point. The media swarmed to cover it. CNN, ABC, The Guardian, The Washington Post. Everyone wanted an interview with the man from seat 2A. At the offices of Sentinel Dynamics, the PR team was in near panic. Chief Communications Officer Maya Lopez called Ethan. "Ethan, the news has exploded. Your video is on every network. We need an official statement before they twist the story." Ethan's voice on the other end was calm, but firm. "I don't need defense. I need truth. You're planning a press conference." "No. I'll speak directly right where they humiliated me." Maya understood that tone, the voice of someone who had nothing left to fear losing. Meanwhile, on a golf course outside the city, North Star CEO Robert Langford received an urgent call from Marketing Director Laura Chen. "Robert, we have a serious problem. Our stock is down 9%. That video's gone global. You need to get back to the office right now. I'm in the middle of my 8th hole, Laura. It's just a passenger complaint." "No, Robert. This isn't a complaint. It's a racial crisis. And the man in that clip is the CEO of a Fortune 500 company." Langford went silent for a moment, his face turning pale. "Call PR. Prepare a standard apology statement. An apology won't be enough. We're being exposed publicly. There are dozens of reporters waiting at the airport already." Robert threw his golf club onto the grass. "God, this is going to be the worst day of my career." Back at the airport, Monica sat beside Ethan in the business lounge. On the big screen, CNN was broadcasting live BlackCeo forced out of first-class North Star faces boycott backlash. Ethan stared at his own image on the screen, his expression distant. "It's strange," he said softly. "All my life I've worked to be seen for my ability. Today they see me only for my skin." Monica looked at him. But this time, that gaze doesn't just carry prejudice, it carries power. Because millions are finally seeing the truth. Ethan stayed quiet. Inside him, two forces collided: anger and responsibility. He didn't want to be a symbol. But sometimes, destiny doesn't ask for permission. 3 hours later, another video surfaced on Twitter, filmed by a passenger from first class. It showed Ethan being escorted off the plane by 2 security officers. The caption read, "When dignity has to stand up and walk out." It spread like wildfire. In New York, Sentinel Dynamics lead investor called Ethan. "Ethan, I just saw the clip. Do you want me to reach out to North Star's board?" "No need. They'll come to me themselves, but not to apologize, to explain." His voice held no anger, only a cold, unshakable certainty. As night fell, the hashtag Justice for Ethan surpassed 10 million mentions. One photograph dominated social media: Ethan walking off the plane, light reflecting off his face, the calm expression of a man humiliated, but unbroken. It appeared on front pages across major newspapers with captions that read, "The man who refused to surrender his seat and shook an entire system. On flight NS-307, Gregory unlocked his phone as the plane landed. His notifications were flooding in. His name was trending. Photos of his face in the cabin were everywhere. One post tagged him directly. This is Gregory Walton, the man who took the seat of BlackCeo Ethan Marshall." His face went pale, his hands trembling as he shut off his phone. In the row ahead, Lena let out a quiet sigh. She knew the storm was coming, and it would spare no one. Somewhere far away in a quiet airport lounge, Ethan Marshall lifted his eyes to the departure board. The line glowed. North Star NS-307. Departed. He smiled faintly, his voice low, almost a whisper. "That's fine. My real flight has just begun." And it had. The storm had left the runway not in the sky, but across the internet, through society, and deep within the conscience of everyone watching. No one knew where it would end. But one thing was certain: when a person dares to stand up and hold on to their seat, the whole world must rethink the system that decided where they should sit in the first place. The next morning, as the first light of day slipped through the glass walls of Atlanta Airport, Ethan Marshall was already seated in a small cafe near the waiting area. In front of him, a cup of espresso still steamed, while his phone buzzed non-stop with new notifications. More than 30 million views in a single night. His name was everywhere on social media. He was not a movie star, not a politician. He was just a black man who had been forced out of a seat he had legally paid for. And now the entire country was talking about it. The cafe door opened, and Monica Reed walked in. Determination lit her face, but there was a trace of worry in her eyes. "You have not slept, have you?" Ethan gave a tired smile. "I could not. Every time I close my eyes, I see myself standing in that cabin. Everyone staring at me, like they were just waiting to see when I would lose my temper." Monica sat down across from him and set her laptop on the table. "I have news. North Star has released a statement." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "A statement, let me guess they call it a misunderstanding." "Exactly," Monica replied as she opened her screen and read aloud, her voice edged with sarcasm. "North Star Airways affirms that we respect all passengers. In the recent incident, the crew was forced to act to ensure the safety and comfort of other customers." Ethan let out a short, dry laugh. "So now I am the threat." Not only that, Monica went on, "they imply you were uncooperative and displayed inappropriate behavior." Ethan leaned back and closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw the two security officers again, hands resting near their tasers. He remembered Lena's eyes full of fear and silent pleading. He remembered the passengers who had stood up for him, Emily Harold strangers, willing to leave the plane to protest an injustice. "They can say whatever they want about me," he said quietly, "but they cannot bend the truth." Just then, Monica's phone rang. "Hello, yes, this is Reed. What, how many views? All right, I am on my way." She hung up and turned to Ethan. "You should brace yourself. CNN, Reuters, and the New York Times all want live interviews. This story has gone far beyond a single airline. They are calling you the man in seat 2A. Ethan gave a faint smile. "A strange nickname, but I will take it." Monica studied him for a moment. "Ethan, are you going to sue?" He fell silent, his gaze drifting out toward the runway, where planes were taking off free and serene unaware of the storms raging on the ground beneath them. I do not know. I do not want this to become an act of revenge. But I cannot stay silent either, because if I stay silent, the next person may not get a chance to speak at all. Monica nodded. Then we begin. At North Star headquarters in downtown Atlanta, the crisis had reached its peak. Conference rooms had stayed lit all night. On a large screen, the stock chart showed a steep line plunging downward. Communications Director Laura Chen spoke in a rush. Social media is exploding. The hashtag Justice for Ethan has passed 50 million mentions. People are calling for a total boycott of our entire flight network. CEO Robert Langford slammed his hand on the table. I told you we should just post an apology statement and be done with it. How did it get worse? Because that was not an apology, Laura shot back. It was denial. How long do you think you can hide this? The video is clear. The whole world has seen Captain Hayes threaten to call security. Robert was at a loss for words. He knew he was losing not in the boardroom, but in the court of public opinion. Every minute, North Star was bleeding millions of dollars. That afternoon, Ethan stepped out of the waiting area into a wall of microphones and cameras. Reporters crowded in, calling his name. He stopped, his expression steady. Monica stood just behind him and gave a small nod. Ethan took the microphone. Yesterday I was asked to give up a seat I had legally purchased because another passenger was considered more deserving. I chose to leave not because I was wrong, but because I didn't want violence to erupt in front of everyone on that plane. His voice was low, resonant, and unwavering. I am the CEO of a large corporation. I have a platform, I have lawyers, I have power. And yet, I was still treated as if my very presence was out of place. If that can happen to me, what is happening to the millions of people who do not have a voice? That question dropped into the crowd like an explosion. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras tracked every word, every breath. One journalist in the front row began to cry. Ethan continued, I do not want revenge. I want only one thing, accountability. Accountability from those who decided that human dignity was negotiable. At that very moment in the cabin of flight, NS-307, which had just landed in San Francisco, Gregory Walton was surrounded by flashing lights. Reporters pushed microphones toward his face and fired questions. Do you have anything to say about taking the seat of a black CEO? I have no comment, Gregory stammered, hurrying away as shouts followed him down the terminal. Only a few hours later, the bank where he worked issued a statement announcing his temporary suspension to support an internal investigation. That evening, Ethan received hundreds of messages from friends, partners, and complete strangers. Some sent congratulations, others shared stories of their own. One woman wrote, I am not a CEO. I am just a nurse. But I know exactly how it feels to be treated like you do not exist. Thank you for not staying silent. Ethan read every line, stunned into silence. He did not know whether to say thank you or to cry. He only knew that his heart felt unbearably heavy, as if he were carrying an entire world waiting for justice. Near midnight, his phone rang again. It was an unknown number. He hesitated, then picked up. Mr. Marshall, this is Robert Langford, CEO of North Star Airways. A long pause followed. Ethan could hear the man's shallow, uneven breathing on the other end. I want to offer you a personal apology. What happened was truly regrettable. We will investigate, and no need for an apology. Ethan cut in, his voice even and cold. I do not need words. I need action. What do you mean? I mean public. I mean transparent. I mean change. If that does not happen, This will not be just an incident. It will be the beginning of a movement." Langford did not answer. Ethan could feel the fear on the other side of the line. Not the fear of losing money, but the fear of losing control. "I will hold a press conference within the next 24 hours, Ethan continued. "If North Star wants to be part of it, I hope that this time you know how to tell the truth." When the call ended, Monica looked at him through the warm yellow light. "You are really going to do this?" "I am not planning," Ethan replied. "I am beginning." Outside, the Atlanta night stretched deep and dark, but inside Ethan a fire was burning bright. Not the fire of rage, but of resolve, the resolve of someone who understands that when dignity is trampled, silence becomes the most dangerous form of complicity. The next morning, the city of Atlanta woke to the chaotic sounds of car horns, breaking news alerts, and glowing screens in every coffee shop. Every major news network was covering the same story: BlackCeo removed from first-class seat, North Star Airways faces nationwide outrage. The footage of Ethan Marshall standing up in the first-class cabin played on repeat. His calm words, "I'm just sitting in the seat I paid for," had been clipped and turned into the most viral sound on TikTok. Social media exploded as people shared, debated, and called for a boycott. Inside North Star's emergency boardroom, the air was so tense it could be cut with a knife. On the large display screen, the company's stock chart plunged like a plane in free fall. CEO Robert Langford leaned over the table, his bloodshot eyes revealing he hadn't slept all night. "Shares have dropped another 8%. We've lost nearly $1 billion in market value in just 2 days," the chief financial officer reported. "And it's not slowing down," added Laura Chen, head of marketing. "Every response we've posted online is being torn apart as hollow and irresponsible." Robert slammed his palm on the table. "I need a plan, something strong enough to save this company's image." But his voice was drowned out by an alert flashing across the screen. Breaking news. North Star's internal documents leaked 68 racial bias complaints buried. The room went silent. What Robert stammered. Laura opened her laptop, scrolling quickly. Someone claiming to be an anonymous HR employee just sent CNN and the Washington Post internal records, dozens of discrimination complaints that were handled internally over the past year. Robert collapsed into his chair. His entire career was crumbling line by line on the news ticker. Meanwhile, at the temporary office of the Center for Equal Transit, Monica Reed was in a meeting with Ethan. The table was covered with stacks of documents, laptops, and endless interview requests. "Ethan, do you see this?" Monica pointed at the CNN screen showing the leaked reports. They buried 68 similar cases. "This isn't about individuals anymore, it's the entire system." "I know," Ethan said quietly, his voice firm. "And if they think I'll sign an NDA to stay silent, they're wrong." Monica nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "We're filing a civil rights investigation. But first you need to speak publicly. Not to defend yourself, but to lead." Ethan looked out the window. The Atlanta sky was clear and bright. Airplanes traced white streaks across the blue, like scars in memory. "They wanted to shame me," he said slowly. "But they forgot I don't live by reputation. I live by principle." That afternoon, Ethan held an impromptu press conference in the lobby of his hotel. Hundreds of reporters packed the room, cameras lined up in rows. There were no corporate logos, no flashy backdrops, just one man standing in front of a plain white curtain. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of millions of quiet sighs. "I'm not the first victim, and I may not be the last. But silence only makes it easier for this to continue. I don't want to destroy an airline. I want to fix a system that treats the existence of black people as an error in its statistics. A reporter asked, "Do you accept North Star's apology?" "Apology," Ethan gave a faint, tired smile. "An apology means nothing without change. I don't want words. I want action." Standing beside him, Monica felt as though she was witnessing a new chapter of history being written before her eyes. That evening, Ethan returned to the headquarters of Sentinel Dynamics. The building was glowing, not from work, but because everyone was watching him. When he walked in, employees stood. No one spoke, but their eyes said everything pride. Maya Lopez, the communications director, approached him. "Ethan, I just got a call from one of North Star's internal journalists. Someone on their board wants a private meeting. Who Edward Winters, the chairman of the board. What for? They're offering a private settlement, an 8-figure payout, and a permanent silence clause." Ethan laughed softly. Silence. They still don't know who I am. He pulled out his phone and texted Monica. "Prepare the lawsuit. No negotiation." The next morning, the New York Times published an editorial titled, "When a Seat Becomes a Battleground." The piece praised Ethan not for his wealth, but for his courage to defend dignity against the pressure of an entire system. Civil rights organizations, activists, artists, and other CEOs all voiced their support. The hashtag Justice for Ethan was no longer just a hashtag, it had become a movement. At North Star headquarters, chaos reigned. Major shareholders demanded an emergency meeting. The law firm representing the airline announced its withdrawal. Captain Hayes was suspended, and Chief Attendant Colin Rogers was placed under investigation. Meanwhile, reporters uncovered a personal connection between Gregory Walton and Colin. Gregory had helped Colin's son secure an internship at his bank. The narrative shifted from racial bias to privilege and corruption, from prejudice to power, disguised as favoritism. North Star wasn't just losing its image, it was losing its soul. That night, Ethan sat alone in his office, city lights reflecting across his face. His phone rang non-stop, offers gratitude, even threats. He opened his laptop and typed his first public post since the incident. Justice doesn't come from the courtroom. It begins when one person decides not to stay seated. Within an hour, the sentence was shared more than 1 million times. Monica texted him, "You just turned a sentence into a declaration." Ethan replied, "I didn't write a declaration. I told the truth." He leaned back in his chair, eyes closing slowly. Outside, the Atlanta night roared with noise, but inside him was a rare stillness, the stillness of a man who had just lit a torch, knowing that from this moment on, its light would no longer belong to him alone. By the third morning after the incident, Atlanta felt like it was living through an earthquake. Every newspaper carried the image of Ethan Marshall, the black man, walking out of first class with his head unbowed. But behind that calm expression, a storm was brewing, pressure threats and cracks in the world he once thought was solid. Inside the glass-walled boardroom on the 28th floor of Sentinel Dynamics, Ethan sat with his board of directors. The air was so tense it vibrated. Victoria Reeves, a board member and major shareholder, crossed her arms, her tone cold. "Ethan, I understand you're angry, but we're a cybersecurity firm, not a social justice organization. This story is dragging the company down." Ethan lifted his head, his voice low but steady. "Our company was built on ethics. If we stay silent in the face of injustice, we lose that long before we lose our stock price." "But ethics don't feed the market," Victoria snapped. 3 of our contracts are on hold because no one wants to be tied to this scandal." Maya Lopez, head of communications, spoke up. "Victoria, this isn't a scandal anymore. It's a movement. The whole country is watching Ethan, and if we stand with him, Sentinel can become a symbol of ethical technology." Victoria let out a short, bitter laugh. "Or a symbol of recklessness." Ethan rose from his chair and walked slowly to the window. Below, the city moved like a living network of data cars, people lights all interwoven in what seemed like perfect order. But he knew injustice operated through systems just as well. "I built this company from nothing," he said slowly. "If telling the truth costs me everything, so be it. But I won't be the CEO of a company that stays silent while human dignity is erased." The room fell silent. Maya looked at him with a mix of pride and worry. Victoria sighed and murmured, "You're turning yourself into a symbol, Ethan. And symbols don't survive easily." Meanwhile, in the basement of North Star's headquarters, the crisis had reached its breaking point. Reporters camped outside the gates, shareholders called non-stop, and government investigators had begun sending subpoenas. Laura Chen, the marketing director, stared at the company's internal message board, her hands clammy. An anonymous employee had just posted, "I once reported being discriminated against for a promotion. They told me not to be so sensitive. Now I realize what happened to Mr. Marshall wasn't an isolated mistake, it's a culture." The post was shared more than 10,000 times within the company. North Star was no longer just an airline, it had become a symbol of systemic deceit. In his private office, Robert Langford sat, hunched over dark circles under his eyes. His phone rang constantly, investors' lawyers, even the Department of Transportation. Another call came in. He grabbed it, his voice trembling. "I'm here." On the other end was Edward Winters, chairman of the board. "Robert, there's an emergency board meeting at 3 this afternoon. They want you to step down. I can't protect you anymore." "You're joking. I followed procedure." "Procedure ruined you, Robert. And now you're the liability." The phone slipped from Robert's hand and crashed to the floor. In that shattering sound, he understood his silence had finally consumed him. Around noon, Ethan received a text from Monica Reed. "Get ready. It's official, the Federal Civil Rights Commission is launching a full investigation into North Star." He stared at the message, feeling both relief and weight pressing on his chest. He wasn't celebrating. He simply felt the burden of all those who had once stayed silent, now placing their hope on his shoulders. "Monica, I don't want this to turn into a personal war." "I know," she replied, "but sometimes to change a system, you have to start with one person who refuses to bow." That evening, Ethan came home late. His high-rise apartment overlooking the river was unusually quiet, but he knew the world outside was still roaring with his name. On the table, his phone rang. It was Zora, his 16-year-old daughter. "Dad, everyone at school is talking about you. Some say you're a hero. Others say you're causing trouble. And what do you think? I think if fairness requires trouble to exist, then I'm proud of you." Ethan laughed softly, his voice thick. "You just made me stronger, sweetheart." "Dad, I saw a video they used the moment you walked off the plane and added music behind it. They're calling you the man who wouldn't leave his seat." "It's got millions of views," Ethan froze. A moment of humiliation had become a source of inspiration. He had never imagined that would happen, and he had never felt so small amid a storm carrying his name. Late that night, high up in the hotel where reporters had gathered, Monica received an anonymous message. She opened it. It was a photo of an internal North Star email titled VIP Priority Crew Instructions. It read, In case of duplicate seat assignments between a first-class passenger and a platinum member, prioritize the platinum member. Handle discreetly, avoid attention. Preserve brand image. Monica immediately forwarded it to Ethan with a short message. We have our first piece of evidence. He read it, then replied with 2 words. Let's begin. At dawn, Ethan appeared live on Good Morning America. The host asked Mr. Marshall, "Where do you think this ends?" Ethan smiled gently, his gaze calm. "I don't want it to end, because if it ends, someone else will be treated the way I was and no one will know. I'm not fighting to win. I'm fighting so no one else has to endure this again." The studio fell silent. A few seconds later, the audience broke into applause. Online thousands shared the clip with the caption, "This isn't a story about a first-class seat. It's a story about the first class of human dignity." As the sunrise spread across the horizon, Ethan stood on his balcony, the cold wind brushing his hair. The city below slowly came alive with light. He knew that from this moment on, he was no longer just a businessman. He was the whistleblower for justice. But deep down, he also knew one truth. Justice always comes with a price, and he was ready to pay it with everything he had. 3 days after his television interview, America erupted again. Not because of a statement, but because of a leaked batch of documents, hundreds of pages of internal emails, human resources guidelines, and lists of complaints that had been buried for years. The anonymous sender signed only one line, "I cannot continue working for an organization that disrespects human beings." On Twitter, the hashtag #NorthStarLeaks went viral within minutes. CNN ran a special report. According to internal sources, North Star Airways recorded over 68 incidents of discrimination within 1 year, including at least 12 cases where passengers were forced to give up their seats to senior white members. Comments poured in 68 incidents in a year. That's nearly 1 per week. If Ethan Marshall hadn't been filmed, these cases would have remained buried forever. Behind the screen, Ethan sat in his office with Monica Reed. On the desk lay a thick, printed file marked with yellow sticky notes. Monica tapped her fingers against the table. We finally have what they fear, most documented truth. Ethan remained silent, his eyes scanning each email, including one from North Star's Deputy Human Resources Director that read, "Internal resolution is sufficient. No need for additional PR issues." He exhaled slowly. This is not just discrimination. This is how a system preserves its power. That afternoon, Ethan's phone rang. Maya Lopez, communications director at Sentinel Dynamics, spoke urgently. "Ethan, they're striking back. North Star just launched a campaign saying you are manipulating media to boost your profile. Some conservative outlets are digging up a 15-year-old business dispute to smear your reputation." Ethan closed his eyes and inhaled deeply calm. I knew they would do this. When they cannot refute the truth, they attack the messenger. Do you want us to respond? No. Let the facts speak for themselves. Monica looked at him, her gaze steady. You know they think you'll break. They don't realize that by trying to twist you, they're exposing themselves to millions. Meanwhile, at North Star headquarters, Edward Winters, chairman of the board, entered the emergency meeting room. Around the table, 12 men and women. Shareholders, lawyers, crisis advisors looked grim. The stock has fallen 27%, one said. Partner airlines are suspending cooperation, another added. If we do not act immediately, we could be insolvent within 2 months. Edward gripped his coffee cup tightly, scanning the room. I told Robert Langford the only way to contain this crisis is transparency. But he chose to hide. Now he must step down. The General Counsel nodded. Langford submitted his resignation this morning. Captain Hayes and Chief Attendant Colin Rogers have also been permanently suspended. Edward leaned back and exhaled. And Walton, that banker, fired by Harbourview Bank. Rumours say he is under investigation for manipulating internal policies to benefit Colin's son. Edward smirked, a hint of irony in his voice. An empire falls over a single seat, two-way. That evening, Ethan was invited to a special CBS interview. The reporter asked him directly, "Do you think this was just about discrimination, or is there a larger issue?" Ethan replied slowly, his eyes fixed on the camera. "Discrimination is the root, but not the whole story. The real danger is when power learns to exploit bias to protect its interests. If a system can justify injustice using skin color today, tomorrow, it could justify oppression for any reason." The studio fell silent for a few moments. Then applause filled the room. The host nodded. "It seems you're not just fighting for yourself, but for an entire generation." Ethan only smiled. "I do not want to be a symbol. I only want that no one has to give up the seat they purchased, simply because someone else thinks they are more deserving." The next morning, Monica knocked on Ethan's office door. In her hand was a thick, sealed envelope with no return address. She set it on his desk and spoke quietly. This was sent from someone inside North Star, perhaps the same person who leaked the documents. "You should see it." Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of an email from Edward Winters to CEO Langford, sent 3 months before the incident. "Do not waste resources on minor complaints. Focus on high-value customers. They are the ones who generate real profit." Ethan stared at the words for a long moment, his eyes darkening. "They don't see people as customers," he said softly. "They see them as profit." Monica tightened her grip on her hands. "Do we make this public? Not yet. Let them stumble on their own words." That afternoon, at a luxury hotel in Washington, DC Edward Winters held an emergency press conference. He stood before dozens of cameras, his face attempting to remain calm. "North Star Airways commits to comprehensive change. We will invest in anti-bias training and collaborate with civil rights organizations to develop fairer policies." A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Winters, is it true you previously emailed instructions to ignore discrimination?" Complaints. Edward's face froze. Camera flashes went off repeatedly. He forced a smile, his voice shaky. "I don't recall, but perhaps that was taken out of context." The entire hall erupted. Immediately, Monica displayed the email to the press on a large screen. Edward's response vanished into the chaos of shouted questions. That night, Ethan received thousands of messages of gratitude. People called him the man who made an entire corporation bow. He remained silent, staring at his laptop screen. The latest article in The Guardian read, "North Star crumbles. When one man's pride forces a system to look at itself." Monica approached and asked quietly, "How do you feel?" Ethan responded with a faint smile. "This is not the end. This is only the beginning. Now they see the problem, and I will make them fix it." Outside the window, the city's neon lights reflected on his face. Not the glow of victory, but the light of a mission. A new battle had begun, no longer on a plane, but in the hearts and policies of an entire nation. 1 week after the incident, Ethan Marshall sat in a private conference room with Monica Reed and Sentinel Dynamics legal team. Light streamed through the window across his face, calm yet sharp as a blade. "They just sent a private settlement offer." Monica said, her voice low but resolute, An 8-figure payout with a non-disclosure agreement, permanent silence. Ethan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In his mind, he saw the first-class cabin, Lena Brooks's eyes the passengers who stood up for him, and Gregory Walton's challenging stare. "They think I will sell my truth, just to keep the peace," he said slowly, each word forged like steel. "But I will not. Not for myself, and not for anyone else who might face the same injustice." Monica nodded, her eyes bright. "You are setting a standard. Not just for yourself, but for the entire airline industry, for everyone who has been disrespected." Ethan opened his laptop and reviewed the leaked email from Edward Winters, chairman of North Star. "Do not waste resources on minor complaints. Focus only on high-value customers." He let out a faint, dry laugh, like sand slipping through fingers. "They've revealed their true nature. This isn't just personal bias. It's a system deliberately ignoring fairness." Monica placed a hand on his shoulder. "We must make this public, Ethan. We must turn this humiliation into power. Show everyone that even if you are pushed out, you can still change the system." Ethan opened his eyes and looked out the window. The city glimmered in muted golden light, but inside him, a storm was raging. "This is not about me," he said, his voice deep and steady. "This is about everyone without a voice. I will not stay silent. I will do everything in my power to ensure that next time no one is forced out of their seat simply because of skin color or someone else's authority." Monica smiled, watching him. "Exactly. You are not just holding a seat for yourself. You are holding a seat for everyone." Outside, darkness fell over the city, but in that glass-walled room, Ethan Marshall knew he had stepped into a much larger battle, not just over a first-class seat, but over dignity, justice, and a system gone wrong. He pressed send on an email to the PR team, prepare the press release. This is no longer a personal story. It is time to expose the truth and begin change. And this time, Ethan knew for certain he would not be alone. 1 month after the incident, Ethan Marshall stood at the podium of the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Behind him were the faces who had stood by him from the beginning: Monica Reed, Emily Carter, Harold Benson, Noah Kim, Gabriela Morales, a former North Star flight attendant, and representatives from civil rights organizations. No one was looking at him as a powerful CEO anymore. They were looking at him as a symbol of dignity and justice. He inhaled deeply. Cameras panned slowly, and the glare from hundreds of lenses illuminated his face. 31 days ago, I boarded a flight with a first-class seat I had legally purchased. But I was forced to leave simply because another passenger was considered more deserving. The clicking of cameras echoed. This was not just a personal incident. This is a system where those without a voice, often people of color, are dismissed, removed, or treated as if they do not exist. Ethan held up his boarding pass, his gaze fixed on the camera. I could have remained silent, accepted a settlement, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and returned things to normal. But I did not. I am not just holding my seat. I am holding the dignity of everyone who could be treated the same way. Hundreds of eyes in the room followed his every movement. North Star Airways has agreed to establish a $50 million transportation equity initiative fund to monitor, support, and promote fairness in transportation. They have also committed to comprehensive policy reform, anti-bias training, and regular reporting on enforcement. Ethan inhaled his voice, deep and steady. This is not about punishment. This is about accountability and systemic change. The easiest path would have been to accept compensation and stay silent. But true change does not come from the easy path. He looked at each person in the audience, speaking slowly with emotion. The solidarity of the passengers who left the plane with me, of those who recorded and shared the truth. This is proof that change happens when people dare to stand up. A few tears rolled down the cheeks of some audience members. Ethan continued, "The next generation will not have to work twice as hard for half the justice. And if anyone asks why I am so determined, the answer is simple. Justice is not a personal privilege. It is a system that respects human beings." The camera panned over the entire audience, a mix of hopeful and determined eyes. Ethan stepped down from the podium and looked toward Monica. "We have just lit a torch, and this light will guide others." Outside, the Washington sunlight streamed through the windows, reflecting off the small badge of the Alliance for Transportation Equality on a flight attendant's uniform. Ethan smiled. A first-class seat can be taken away, but dignity and justice can never be lost. From that moment, the torch of justice burned brightly, not only across social media, but in the hearts of millions following this story. The story of Ethan Marshall is not just about a first-class seat or personal humiliation. It is a clear testament that dignity and justice are values that cannot be bought with money measured by status or claimed through power. When an individual has the courage to stand up, they do more than protect themselves. They create an opportunity for an entire system to change. Brave actions, no matter how small, can generate ripples that spread far and wide, bringing fairness to those who have no voice. If you believe that every person deserves respect and the strength to stand against injustice, hit like on this video to spread the message and subscribe to follow more stories where courage meets justice. Leave a comment below with a short phrase to express your view and commitment to fairness. Stand for dignity. Let your voice, together with acts of courage, create real change. Justice is not just the victory of one person, it is a system that respects all.